Let's talk about the future. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you don't have to be Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. Yeah, it was about time we made one of these. Grossi, and today we're going to do something a smidge different. It's not going to be about the Packers or even the NFL as a whole, and instead we're going to kind of talk about this industry that I and many others find themselves in, and kind of where it's been heading for a while, how we kind of got to this point, and what it means for the future, and honestly, how exciting that future could be. Now, before I get started, I have to do a big shout out to my co-host of GPS, one Brandon Perna, who put out an excellent 50-plus minute video on the rise and fall of ESPN, and it was really well done. Also, shout out to Will Keys, and of course, the one and only Johnny Barks, who's editing this right now. Those guys did a phenomenal job of kind of just going through the entire narrative, and I highly recommend going and check that out. Brett Coleman put out a video about sports media a couple of weeks back, which was also well done, and I kind of just wanted to take a different spin on this because I think it's important to talk about, and I think just attempting to understand why the industry is changing the way it is, it just provides some interesting insight, and I think it provides a lot of optimism about what the future of sports media could look like. So let's get started, and let's talk about sports personalities. And when I say that, there's gonna be some folks that pop to mind. Like the old days, you had the Chris Bermans, the Scott Van Pelts. Today, you got guys like Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp, Stephen A. Smith, and I know that those guys are radically different from one another. Some are just hot take artists, some are analysts, some are just personalities. Some are funny, some are journalists, some of them are all of those things. But the point is that back in the day, if you wanted to see sports personalities, there really was only one place you would go, and that was SportsCenter, and that was on ESPN. I mentioned before Chris Berman, and that guy just lives in my heart forever because just waking up every single morning and turning on SportsCenter, or going to bed and keeping that on my TV late at night and putting the timer on of being like, okay, I'll watch these highlights, I'll watch Chris Berman go whoop a whole bunch of times, and then I'll be able to go to sleep. There is so much nostalgia that's built into that, and that was an integral part of getting me to fall in love with football and sports as a whole. I'll never forget Scott Van Pelt going on the heartfelt tribute to his dog who had recently passed away. Of course, Stuart Scott, a pioneer and just amazing journalist and personality on ESPN. You got Dan Patrick, you got Rich Eisen. All of these people created an audience that wanted to see them. And of course, ESPN offered more than that. They had the content, whether it was the highlights, the top 10s, the biggest hits, the come on, man, all of those things. You would flock to SportsCenter, to ESPN to watch them. They would replay often, and it really was just the only place you could go. So it had this perfect mix of content, in my case, football and NFL, and personalities that you just wanted to see and felt like your day wasn't complete until you saw them. And this is equivalent to having personalities or anchors today, right? Whether it's your morning news, your weather, and that people gravitate towards those personalities. They want to see them every day. And it's kind of just like, oh, part of their routine. You saw this even with announcers, right? Whether it was Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, or my personal favorite, Pat Summerall and John Madden, in that when you knew they were commentating, it was already going to be a better game because you were going to get an experience. It was like when Tony Romo came on the commentating scene a few years ago. I really loved Tony Romo because he gave you an analytical insight on what players were going to do, what kind of schemes they were drawing up. And he would usually say this before the play even happened. So you felt like you were getting smarter and becoming more knowledgeable about football while watching the game, and it wasn't overwhelming. Of course, the popularity of these sports personalities and content just spawned more content and more sports personalities. This would happen on different stations, news networks, NFL Network, Barstool Sports, right? These big media conglomerates who would get into sports, and all of a sudden, there was competition within the space. And on top of that, you look at the news media cycle for the past decade and a half has really shifted to becoming 24/7 news. And so ESPN, which was all about sports, also had to pivot, and it had to become about 24/7 sports. And that is very difficult to do. As you may know, since August of 2019, I put out content at least 5 days a week. There's some times in June and July where that is very challenging. And while training camp started today and there's now going to be a plethora of new news and preseason is about to begin, it's those dead months which make it really, really difficult. And while ESPN could lean on the fact that there was a lot of sports out there, whether it was bowling, basketball, badminton, baseball, all of these sports, at the end of the day, it's still very difficult to fill all of that content space. So you went from having one central hub, which was all about sports and personalities, that great combo that I mentioned, and then all of a sudden, some of those personalities started doing their own thing. Dan Patrick, Rich Eisen, we'll get to Pat McAfee. Folks who didn't necessarily need those big corporations, companies, etc. Many of them had platforms before, whether it was on ESPN, NFL Network, or played in the NFL, so they were able to utilize that platform and then turn it into their own thing. I mean, heck, look at the Rich Eisen show, which of course is about sports, but you also have a variety of different personalities that are on that program talking about a ton of different topics because people are tuning in for Rich Eisen and the interesting guests that he is bringing on. So you have this landscape of old media, which is starting to shift and transition to having individual personalities that people can now seek out. And then you have YouTube. YouTube changes the game completely because now all you needed was a microphone, an internet connection, and a camera. And that was it. And so folks who did not have that platform, folks who did not have that experience or background, but they were passionate about sports, were able to turn on a camera, plug in a microphone, and maybe people would listen. And of all the things that we just talked about, the 24/7 media news cycle, or the personalities, or just the highlights, all of that can now be found on YouTube and a variety of other platforms, whether it's Twitter, I refuse to call it X, TikTok, Instagram. There are now analysts, personalities, commentators who are on every single one of those platforms. There are folks I know who just go to Twitter to get their sports news, whether it's looking at highlights from training camp. For example, a ton of beat writers for the Green Bay Packers are posting footage, highlights, and that's not just beat writers. It's also content creators, fans. Folks can now get all the information that they want about their team, their sport, from different social media networks and or YouTube. So that has created one of the most important things, and that is choice. Back in the day, you didn't have that choice. Now you have all of that and more. And the other component that's so crucial to this is accessibility. You don't even need to have cable anymore to watch games. You can pay for YouTube TV this upcoming season and get season ticket. By the way, they are not sponsored. Or you can watch highlights on YouTube. You used to be able to just go to SportsCenter. Now there's guys like Highlight Heaven who make highlights immediately after the play has happened. So it's that instant gratification. You're able to see it. And sometimes they do it even better than the organizations we're talking about. The NFL might be a little bit slower getting those highlights out, and individual creators can get them out quicker. They look really good. And on top of that, there can be that personality component. For example, the reaction videos. The way that I get those out within 30 minutes of the news breaking is usually I'm waiting for it. I have a whole box of jerseys that are sitting right off camera. So as soon as news breaks, I go, I throw on a jersey, I sit in front of a camera, I record, I edit, and I put it out. Because people want to either see their team's reaction, they want to get some kind of coverage on this, or they would like to see a skit made out of it. The point is that the content has never been more accessible because all you need is an internet connection and everybody has a computer in their pocket. My first venture into streaming was in 2018. I streamed the 2018 NFL draft, and a few people watched it, and I was super happy about that. The first game I ever streamed was week 1 of 2018 when it was the Packers against the Bears. And my audio was terrible, the webcam didn't look good, but there was still a handful of people that were there and they were watching. And I quickly realized that a lot of the people that were watching were Packers fans, which makes sense, but why were they watching a guy talk about a game that they couldn't see and they couldn't hear. And then it evolved past that. It evolved to people were muting the Joe Bucks and Troy Aikmans of the world and instead syncing up my stream with the TV. They'd have me on their phone, or maybe they'd have their game on a tablet. People want choice. They don't want to have to listen to Joe Buck or Troy Aikman. And I know I'm saying their names a lot. I'm not trying to throw shade at them, but they are representative of kind of like that old way. That's why the Manning cast is doing so well, because sometimes people want to actually just hear what fans think, or people who are just really passionate about football. And those commentators, they have restrictions on what they can say, if they can cheer for teams, etc. Me, I can just talk about football and say anything I want because I love the sport. I can get excited when Jordan Love throws a touchdown to Christian Watson and scream and cheer and open a beer. I can do all of those things because I'm not bound by any network sponsorship, etc. And that gives creators insane amounts of freedom. And this is not just about streaming. This is not just about highlights. Look at Urinating Tree, his sports ball series, one of the most popular things in our space. And it's highlights and it's Urinating Tree's personality that make those videos. It's that combination that ESPN used to have, and obviously a little bit more edgier with Tree. But the point is that people flock to Tree for his personality, and it's also a way to stay up to date on current NFL news. They're able to look at a 15 to 20 minute video and they will have an entire NFL week summarized. And for some casual fans, that's what they're looking for. For example, the Netflix show that just came out, Quarterback. People really liked that. And for me, I liked it. I didn't think it was revolutionary, but people that I know who don't watch sports as religiously as I do, they really liked it because it was able to be personable. And on top of that, they were able to see a condensed version instead of a 3.5-hour game played over 18 weeks, plus the playoffs. And that leads me to another major point. How sports content creators have a leg up on old media, and that's why you see them starting to shift, is because it's also interactive. Someone can go on and go in a live stream and they can make a comment and a creator can see that, talk about it, and now we can have a conversation. I've done Friday night Q&As for about 5 years now. And that's what that is me cracking a beer and we talk about sports, we talk about news, we talk about just about anything. And plus those get a little wild sometimes. But that interactive component was not available back then. Could you imagine being able to send a comment or talk to Chris Berman while he was on the air? And that's why this medium is so powerful, because it's not only just building content, but content creators can also build a community. And if there's any community that represents that, it's this community. We just raised over $500,000 for St. Jude. And that being done in this space just speaks to how powerful this medium can be. And that was one of the reasons why guys like Pat McAfee found so much success. Pat McAfee was an alternative to the ESPN, to the NFL Network, because he was uncensored, it was him and his friends, and they were able to say whatever the heck they wanted, and there was an interactive component there in which he does live stream the draft. On top of that, you could call in, you could interact with these guys, and so not only was the show entertaining, but the personalities were there, the content was there, and it was 5 days a week. So that became part of people's routine. Now, ESPN, they've had a bunch of layoffs, which is incredibly sad, and it represents where the business is kind of heading. Because as Brett Coleman said in his video, unless you are drawing eyeballs and dollars, you are now expendable, which is an unfortunate, sad reality and side effect of this growing sports media market. Because back in the day, you had to go to college, you got to get a journalism degree in order to just get in the door at one of these places. Now, if you have the love for the game and have any type of speaking skills and a camera, an internet, and a microphone, you can make content that will attract an audience. And so now Pat McAfee joining ESPN, is ESPN realizing, oh crap, we kind of need to get with it because we're being left behind. And you see this happening even throughout the NFL. Look at Amazon, who brings in creators, and a lot of them are geared towards TikTok because they're trying to get that younger generation who doesn't necessarily want to sit through 3.5 hours of football to watch a game. They want to be interested, they want to be engaged. And as a former teacher, I get it. I had to make farming interesting to high school freshmen at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's the job. That's your responsibility. And with this, I don't want to make boring videos or boring content because nobody's going to watch that, and I'm going to be miserable doing it. But the point that I'm making with McAfee is, yes, he had a platform before. He was an NFL player, and because of that, he had a ton of connections that he could reach out to and get really high-profile guests on his show. And now he is joining ESPN, and I know that's gotten a lot of backlash. And as I said to Pat McAfee on his show, I think a lot of that backlash comes from his loyal fans, in which his fans are worried that things are going to change. And it's coming out of a place of love, and they're worried that the thing that they have grown to love and the community that they've come to be a part of is going in a direction where they're either not going to be welcome or it's just going to flat out change. And it could be into something better. It could be into something worse. I don't know. And I'm not trying to be negative about that. It's just that fans have that concern. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that as creators, there is a path in which you now can be successful. You can gain an audience. You can build a community, and you don't have to be sponsored by a big company. You don't have to be part of a corporation. You don't have to have all these insane connections with players or league officials. You can just go out and do it. You can pick up a camera, a microphone, and just go. And listen, it's probably gonna suck. I know I sucked for a very, very long time. Some would argue I still suck. But now more than ever, it is possible. And it is very oversaturated, absolutely. But if you remain consistent and you have good content, there are ways to break through. And I think that's the most exciting thing, is because years from now, what sports media is going to look like is going to be radically different from 10, 15, 20 years ago. The fact that you have creators who are doing meetups, and I'm not even talking about myself, and people are coming out to them. We've seen these things with VidCon, and usually sports creators don't really fit in that niche. But as time has gone on, the communities have gotten bigger, the personalities have gotten better, and all of a sudden you're starting to see creators make waves, whether it's leagues or teams starting to collaborate with creators because they realize, oh crap, this is good for business, because these organizations, even these teams, are enormous. They don't have the capacity to sit there every single Friday for a Q&A or to interact with just about every single person who passes through. They don't have the bandwidth to do it, but we do. And that is incredibly powerful and incredibly meaningful. Whether it's guys who've been doing this for a long time, like Brandon Perna or Tree or Five, or it's guys like Cole from How About Those Chiefs, who in a year and a half has been able to get over 100,000 subscribers, which is incredibly impressive. The point that I'm making is that things are trending in the direction of creators. I used to look at ESPN and SportsCenter and the NFL Network as these big titans of industry of, wow, could be crazy one day to get our foot in the door, even with the Green Bay Packers. But it became very apparent very early on that the difficulty, the education, the experience that you needed to be able to get in the door at any of those places is vast. So instead of knocking on the door of that big tower, I decided to try and build one myself. And I'm not putting myself on a pedestal or even saying that I'm a major creator in this space. What I'm trying to say is that for new creators who are thinking about trying to get into this space and they see how oversaturated it is or how difficult it is or how much effort there is, that's all true. All of those things are 100% true. But a path has already been laid for you to follow that you can be successful in this space, whether it's the analytical side of things, whether it's the personality angle, whether it's the comedy angle, or whether it's just I like to talk about football and do interviews with folks. The sports media is such a large landscape, and it has room for everybody. Some are going to do well, some are not going to do well. But that's the beauty of it, is that the audience decides that. And so I have folks that have been here since 2015 who have watched this entire journey. They've been there when there's 5 to 10 people in those live streams, and now they're here when we're doing crazy things. And it's only going to get bigger. Quarterback on Netflix is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a major desire for sports content, and the people that are going to lead that industry forward are not necessarily going to be that of old media or those old companies and organizations. They can be sports content creators. And as creators, if you continue to push the boundaries of content, whether it's interviewing players, whether it's going out there and interacting with fans, or whether it's just building a community online or creating different types of content, there's an insane amount of people out there that you can reach with your content. And if you're lucky and you work your ass off, you might just be able to build something great. So for anybody who's thinking about it and actually loves it and wants to do it, just go. Buy a cheap camera, buy a cheap microphone, and just go. You're gonna suck, and you could get better. The point is that if this is something you are passionate about, it could just be a hobby, it could be a side thing you do once a week, but if you're consistent and passionate, good things could happen. The point is that if you're thinking about doing it, just try it. You might hate it after 6 weeks and nobody watches because everybody goes through that. But I'm here to tell you, try, because the path is there. And if you really want to go for it, it is possible. And for old media, I'm not going to be surprised if you're going to see more and more content creators get involved with those big leagues, those big organizations that we grew up idolizing, and those being part of our routine. Because now as sports creators, we have an audience and we are now a part of their routine. And that is something incredibly powerful you never take advantage of. And let's just keep pushing the envelope and see what's possible. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. You know, find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or TomGrossiComedy, all social media, see down below. Check out Patcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And a big shout and thank you to all the patrons over at patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy and the YouTube members. But thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.